We are about to have a panel discussion covering consciousness, reality, and the esoteric elucidations of VR. We have a big panel here with people from lots of different backgrounds and experiences, and I'd like for people just to briefly introduce themselves, and then I'll ask some questions and we'll dive in. So why don't we just go down to the line and just kind of set the context as to who's here to be talking about consciousness and the nature of reality.
I'm Tina Madry. I'm a psychonaut and an inner space explorer.
Hi, I'm Brett Leonard. I'm a film director. I directed The Lawnmower Man, which introduced the term VR and concept of popular culture. And I'm a psychonaut for many, many years.
Hi, I'm Scott Mason. I'm a psychedelic researcher that studies cognitive sciences at York University, and I'm also a expert psychonaut, in my opinion.
Wow.
Yeah, sorry, guys.
No worries.
Boy, I see a trend forming. I'm also a psychonaut. I'm an author and writer. I do media theory, criticism, humor, and I also do work on the simulation hypothesis and publish about that.
Hi.
I was hoping something like that.
Hi, my name is Audri Phillips. I'm a content creator. Started out as a painter and got very technical, do some technical writing for Intel, do content for dome shows, for VR. Used to work in the visual effects industry, now directing a group called Robot Prayers.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeffrey Lynn Damon. I am a VR developer and psychedelic connoisseur. I've been living in Toronto for 10 years now, and I'm your local neighbor. I live in the East End. I've been working in virtual reality for about 4 years now.
Great. So we have a common theme here, I'd say, with consciousness, altered states of consciousness, and what kind of transformations can come about from changing your consciousness through psychedelic experiences or virtual reality experiences. And I think there's a dimension there of when you are on a psychedelic experience, there's these natural questions that come up, which is like, what is the nature of reality? I want to begin this broad discussion by, I think consciousness transformation is probably the one thing that we all are focused on, like the value of what it means to transform our consciousness and through the psychedelic experience. But individually, I'd like to hear from each of you the biggest question that you have that you feel like you're investigating through this cross-section of psychedelics and virtual reality. So what is the question that's really driving your work forward?
I would say my biggest question is, what is the mathematical, consistency that might be found within the perceptual contents of the psychedelic experience that might possibly give us some insight into literally how our wires are arranged in our brain, and whether that can even provide insight into the field of connectome research, which is a new field in neuroscience where through various brain imaging where they try to put together kind of a geometric representation of what the semantic neural networks in our brains look like.
Yeah, my question is, I want to know what the hell is going on here. And the confluence of, psychedelic experience and just human experience, heart experience, spiritual, seeking, and these technologies that are reaching out to us, I believe, are all in a rubric that is leading us towards an understanding of what humanism really is, what we are really actually doing and what we're here for. And it's a very exciting time because those things are starting, those threads are starting to weave together.
My biggest interest, my biggest question is the evolution of language. And when you're in the DMT state, for example, you're given pure information. It almost seems like there's entities talking to you in a way, but it's not a conversation type talking. It's the pure feeling of what that conversation would actually bring to you. And I think through VR, we're going to be able to map the psychedelic experience. There are some researchers out of Kyoto who have created a system where they're able to show you videos, and you're able to look at the videos, and they measure your brain function. Then they can take that same data for your brain function and put that same mechanism on you while you're dreaming. And they're able to actually recreate some eerie-looking videos of what your dreams are. And so in my mind, I think with VR, we're going to be able at some point to take that technology when it's come out of its primitive state, and to be able to actually show these images and show what we're seeing in these states, especially DMT, and then DMT is what I'm really interested in. And to be able to do that, we're going to be able to compare data. And to be able to compare data, we can give the scientific method a place in the psychedelic experience.
My biggest question that I wrestle with when I take psychedelics is, how can I get more people to take psychedelics? How can I do more propaganda and evangelism? If everyone here even just tried LSD or psilocybin or something like that, everyone would be markedly different. That's what it does. It actually civilizes you. It makes you more open. It makes you get in touch with parts of yourself that you repress. And when you are on a psychedelic, those often get healed. It's really not, the kind of psychedelic drug use I do is not recreational. I do it I'm also in psychoanalysis. I've been doing it for a year. So I do it strictly for therapy. And not that you should not do it recreationally, you certainly should. But the big question I have when I take it is that, how can we get more people to do this? Because it's civilizing us. And the fact that it was repressed in the 50s and 60s really held back research. It was banished to the basement, chemists. And the potential for it to uplift us and unite us all, I think anyone who's taken it would say, yeah, that's what the 60s were about, man.
Years ago, I was listening to the radio, and I was listening to Timothy Leary giving a talk. And he said something very interesting. He said that he was not interested in LSD, psychedelics, for any kind of spiritual reasons. He was interested in it because he found it the best way to study how the human mind works, which I thought was really cool. I really liked that. I thought it got right to the heart of things. And as an artist, I'm very interested in finding out how the human mind works, which a number of other people here are too, because how the human mind works is how something looks, how we make things that look interesting to other people, how people are perceiving things. And I'm also interested not only in how the human mind works, but how the basic intelligence of the universe works. Does intelligence begin at the subatomic level? Where does intelligence begin? How do things congeal and connect to each other to form us, for instance? How do they congeal and connect to form consciousness? So that's kind of my biggest questions. And I'm formed a group called Robot Prayers, which is very much involved with that.
Cool. So my life is mostly questions. I guess the biggest thing that I'm trying to figure out is why more people are not talking about this. There's over 1 million people in North America that have smoked dimethyltryptamine, DMT. And when you smoke that compound, you are accelerated into a dimension where, if you pay attention, you will receive linguistic structures where you can look at the topology of these things, if you pay attention, because you're in a chaotic state, mind you. So if you can focus and you can pay attention to these things, you'll understand, and you'll get love and understanding and meaning and intent. So I guess a question that I have is, how can we use electronic virtual reality to simulate the dimethyltryptamine experience in the best way possible? So I'm looking forward to the day that I can download the latest DMT experience and figure out what they're trying to say, because we don't know what these entities are trying to say. Yeah, so that's probably my biggest question. Yeah.
Yeah, I know on May 15th, the book by Michael Pollan of How to Change Your Mind was released, and this is kind of bringing psychedelic research into the mainstream. I know that the MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Research, has been going for a long time, trying to do these experimental studies to show the efficacy of these psychedelics by treating trauma or PTSD or people who are in hospice and trying to reckon with their mortality and death. And so there's a lot of empirical research that's being happening in terms of what these psychedelic drugs can do and their therapeutic use and being able to kind of break us out of the stasis of our normal everyday life. I guess the big question that I have personally is, and listening to some interviews with Michael Pollan, he talks about what is actually happening at a chemical level to be able to some extent, activate or turn down the default mode network within your brain, which allows these new connections to happen. So, to what extent can a virtually mediated visuals or kind of haptic experience be able to do a similar type of chemical change in your mind, which does this ego disillusionment? Right. What I expect is that it's very possible that psychedelics are blazing these new neural pathways for us to train us, but the question is can you get to that point without the psychedelic experience?
Well, it's hard because we don't have the proper legislature put in place for the proper research teams to go in and look at these things. Unfortunately, the way our political system is set up now is dimethyltryptamine is a heavily scheduled drug. So if you do take it, you're putting yourself at great legal risk. So anybody that proactively partakes in good civil disobedience by taking psychedelics, I think should be people that are we look to and maybe we can build a roadmap and we can start and move out from there. Because right now we're at baseline. We have a few things that, we have clinical research of PTSD patients and so forth, transforming their lives. But what about people that are clinically healthy and want to go in and study these things? They're not allowed to do it. And that is absolutely preposterous. So how do we get to that point? And I think it starts with legislature and activism and just talking about it in a way where you don't stigmatize it. DMT is a part of our life. It's in all of our bodies. It's surrounding us in every plant and living organism that's around us. So why is it heavily regulated? Why are plants illegal?
I think it's important to mention that there are risks associated with taking any psychedelic drug, and
of course,
certainly the legal risks.
Well, any drug,
yeah. And there's a set and setting, and having the proper context, and there could be people who may not be able to handle with some of the ego disillusionment that happens in the process of taking a
I'm not advocating everybody take mushrooms in a lunar cycle.
So, but I think because we're on a panel here looking at the cross-section between psychedelics and virtual reality, I think it's there's a deeper question, I guess, that I'm asking, which is that there's a physical chemical reaction that's happening to these psychedelic drugs into the brain. Do you foresee that it's possible to do that technologically mediated pathway to have a similar experience and into these psychedelic experiences?
Scott may be able to answer this.
So the Lucia number 3 light, I don't know if anybody's familiar with this, but it's a light system that it basically induces psychedelic experiences. So under this light, it's not like a full-fledged psychedelic experience. And so I guess to answer your question, I don't think that VR will be able to recreate the exact same thing, but I do think, as you said, there are risks, and there are psychological risks for some people, and so to be able to induce these states in a technological way that's not so invasive to the body would be really helpful for people. And I think you mentioned set and setting, and I want to just say one thing about virtual reality and set and setting is one of the biggest things for me that it could do is bring set and setting and any set and setting to people who are in traumatic situations, who are in hospitals dying or whatnot, that can't leave. And instead of being in a hospital, you could throw on your VR and maybe under the influence of psychedelics, create that set and setting that's perfect for you.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that the entire raison d'etre of this technology is to bring this to a much larger subset of people. I have, my experience with this is I made a movie that showed a man being transformed by brain stimulation sequences in virtual reality as a concept, and 1 billion people saw that film. And even to this day, 25 years later, I get, that's the thing that people are communicating back to me about, is those sequences which also, were the content of those sequences were actually all sacred geometries. So they actually are brain stimulation sequences. People were actually looking at the film on computers, putting shrouds over their head and looking literally at the sequences and saying that they were, getting activated in that way. I think that this technology is designed to bring this to a much larger mass group of people, because the truth is there's only going to be a certain fraction, percentage of people that are going to be chemical psychonauts. That's something that is, and we need to bring this, to the masses in a way that feels non-stigmatized. If you look, at the history of, psychedelic research, like Stan and Christina Groff, who are good friends of mine, there's just so much tremendous body of research here that we can bring into this medium. And I think any content that is being designed in this medium needs to be infused with this kinds of transformational aspect, because that is the reason for this technology, as is in terms of human evolution.
May I make a quick one? I have to agree with everyone up here, but the thing is that I just have a skepticism where I don't believe that any media technology can, I mean, it can be a mimic, it'll be a facsimile, it'll be a mimicry, but that means it's a shadow.
An emulation.
An emulation. And,
it's not an authentic experience.
It's not authentic. And so the thing is that, like, even if we were to give you VR and say this is what LSD is like or this is what DMT is like, you're not going to feel it because your brain waves aren't going to go there. You're chemically not going to go there. So these things, I see VR and psychedelics as like friends, like neighbors, but they got totally different lifestyles.
They can anticipate and help people who are not necessarily ready for ego dissolution.
I would agree with that, yeah.
Because you can put on a VR headset and it changes reality as fast as smoking DMT. It is a technological version of DMT right now, albeit primitive.
Can I say something about DMT? I want you guys' opinion. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I think I just want to address the how does it work on our brain question. So I'm going to try and sum this up as succinctly as possible. So in some of the research that I've been doing, I've come across a book by James L. Kent known as Psychedelic Signal Theory, Shamanism in the Age of Reason. And he has this extremely brilliant hypothesis about how exactly, in a mechanical sense, almost, psychedelic compounds lead to the perceptual effects that they lead to. So psychedelics act as partial agonists for one of the 14 subtypes of serotonin receptors, the 5-HT2A receptor. And these receptors are most densely concentrated in the part of the brain that controls feedback. So it controls perceptual feedback. So this is the part of the brain that integrates all of your sensations into something that's smooth and flows seamlessly. And when you take psychedelics and these receptors are partially activated, a process occurs called recurrent excitation. And I think the best analogy that I could use to describe this is it's like microphone feedback. And this effect causes, most notably, tracers, visual tracers. And I didn't really get to talk about it during my speech in detail what scientific testing of psychedelic experiences in VR might look like, but I think a solid start would be something like put somebody on who's on acid or psilocybin or whatever into a VR headsets, and like a good start, that would be like the most basic thing to measure would be having a dot going across their field of vision, and the person can report how long the tracer is, and we can measure things like.
Well, the headset could even trace how long it takes your eye to move from one side of the lens to the other.
Yeah, we could also utilize eye tracking technology, and some questions that would be, I think, worth investigating are, Like, how does the length of the tracer correspond with the dose? Is it like, is it exponential? Is it a linear curve? What's the correlation between the emotional intensity of the experience look like? And then you can do like other things, like for example, you could have the dot flashing and look at how the tracer acts with various patterns of flashing. And if you really want to get into this, you can even put somebody in some kind of brain imaging technology while this is happening and compare and contrast. These are just kind of some of the ideas that have been spinning around in my head for what this sort of thing might look like.
Yeah, what you're really saying is that it depends on what content you put in the VR headset. If you're going to try to insist that people see a story with a linear, all that, you're not going to get anyone to any kind of meditative state. So it really depends on what content you're putting in the headset. So I think that's what people are going to start developing, is what content can you put in a headset that brings people to this state where the part of their brain, for example, when yogis are meditating, et cetera, is turned off. And that's something that definitely needs to be addressed.
Did you want to?
I was just going to say, when it comes to VR2, there's an interesting thing that happened when you do, happens in my opinion. I don't know if whoever's done NM dimethyltryptamine, maybe you might agree, but one of the first effects is that you get this sense that it's more real than reality in a way. And the best way, my friend asked me to describe this, and the best way I could describe it was, he's like, well, what was it like? And I was like, it took me a couple days to get back to him, and I said, it's kind of like you're an AI waking up that you're AI. And you see, in a way, this construct, and you see that you're only programs. And I think that at what extent, I don't know if you guys might want to add to this, but at what extent do you think that virtual reality could show us that this is a very virtual reality and holographic reality that we live in? And maybe what do you guys think that will actually bring to the table, like if we were to come to that realization?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly correct. The medium itself, this is very much a kind of Marshall McLuhan idea. He actually wrote about this in 1964 in Media Extensions of Man, and you should go back and reread that because it's an amazing treatise on this, and he came from here. So, I believe that it is reflecting to us the fact that all of this is a simulation to begin with, and it literally, that is, when I talk about the raison d'etre of this being transformational, that's the transformational moment, because once that happens, then ego dissolution becomes an entirely other construct. And so setting the context for this is sort of where there's this really amazing thing going on, because I'm going into rooms in Hollywood and talking about VR, with studio heads and things like that, and because it's a new medium, they're open to me talking about things like, then in this section, we're going to take people into a transformational, and they're going to go, oh, that's cool. And I'm like, if I had walked in to say that about a movie concept, they'd kick me out of the room. But in the context of this, so there's a fresh kind of clean slate to this that allows context setting that is really historic and unprecedented, and that's the thing we need to grab the opportunity right now, because there's an opportunity to connect this in a way that brings a lot more people into this entire discussion.
Right.
Yeah.
I think. Would you like to talk?
Well, I just wanted to add to what
Yeah,
he said
go
very
ahead.
quickly, is that we have to also look at technology for what it is. And so a good thing to point out is that the internet itself, like nature, is the original internet, and that all technology is a simulacrum of nature and of natural things that are going on, like code. We are all code. We are genetic code. So I think it's just good to look at it in that way. I just wanted to add. Sorry.
I think that we need to bring more of this transcendental visionary experience into virtual reality, because right now it's mostly corporate guys that are looking to make money and invest and get a return. It's not about that. This is about proactively moving the human civilization forward by bringing visionary experiences to everybody so we can share them and unify and just see that, we're all connected in a way that is behind the scenes. We're all one consciousness, but displaced as single nodes, like in a computer system. And when you realize that you all work together like honeybees, the whole computer will run and it'll go smoothly, and the bugs will work themselves out. And this is what we're doing with virtual reality. We're trying to iron out all of the bad bugs and viruses that are in culture and language today.
Preach, 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 preach. So, I just wanted to make a quick comment about finding out that you really are an AI. So my background is I do a lot of work with the simulation hypothesis. The guy I work with is a NASA physicist named Tom Campbell, who's also an altered states guy. In fact, he did the original out-of-body research with Bob Monroe down at the Monroe Institute. He was one of the guys who helped pioneer binaural beats as a way of technologically inducing an altered state of consciousness. He did so much altered state of consciousness research without using drugs, but with just using TM.
That's transcendental meditation?
Yeah. What's that? Transcendental meditation. It's just mantra meditation. But he ended up having these wild out-of-body journeys, and he has a physics background, like a hardcore physics background. And he's like, oh, it's all virtual reality. So I've got an essay I just put out, you can read it online, called You Already Are an AI, which I encourage you to take a look at, because it's, you like it? Thank you. It's right in this whole area.
Yeah, in my talk earlier, I was talking a bit about panpsychism and being able to look at how the universe is embedded with meaning and consciousness and mind. And I think to a certain extent, people have a direct experience of the nature of reality by having the ego disillusionment and having this sort of experience of that universal consciousness. And then they come back into their concrete reality, or in they're challenged with the trying to translate that direct phenomenological experience into language and words, and then it just is lost. And so I don't know if part of what we can expect to happen is that the VR creation tools become at such a low level that it'd be kind of the equivalent of either having a dream at night or having a psychedelic experience, and to be able to then express yourself, to be able to have a spatial representation of that. And that one of the things that was brought up that I just wanted to point out, which was that to a certain extent, having a psychedelic experience or a shamanic journey or any sort of like altered state of consciousness, there's a certain relationship that you have with your own unconscious symbolism of the meanings of the synchronicities that are happening in your life. And I think that it's important to note that like anybody that is giving you a visual representation of some sort of symbolic experience is going to be the creation of someone else's experience, and that there's a possibility that there could be something in the middle, whereas you're able to abstract your experience into a symbolic form that the symbols that people can have their own relationship to, so that it's able for you to have your own portal into your own dimensions of your unconscious psyche. And so I think that that's a challenge, which is that as virtual reality creators trying to give somebody else a psychedelic experience, well, there's this process of you reaching into the depth of your psyche to figure out what is actually emerging from your own experience, and how can anybody ever sort of take an AI or mediate that for you? I think that is going to be something that is up to each individual. But as artists within virtual reality, how do you go into these altered states of consciousness, have some sort of noetic experience about the nature of reality, and then translate that into a virtual reality experience that then is able to connect to that universal symbols that allow people portals into these different states of consciousness?
Yeah, I think a very critical moment we're in here is setting that context, because this conversation and the language we're using, all of this is an extremely small segment of the human population that can actually have this. And I believe in the bodhisattva concept, which is every blade of grass must wake up and be allowed to.
Yeah,
and in that context, story, I come from this as a storyteller, now I call myself a story worlder because we're building worlds. Every project that I'm doing is embedded within the story a node or several nodes of this exact concept of being able to go into transformational states, and giving this narrative context to that allows a larger group to just go there, because narrative and storytelling allow that openness in a way that, and I've experienced this by making films that are for the mass audience, and it's amazing what comes back, and there's an activation of the hive mind that happens, which is where we need to go. In terms of a cautionary note, though, the very thing that we're talking about, the exact opposite thing can be created with this technology, and that is actually going on right now. So this is a tremendously important moment. It's a pivot point. It's not that these negative aspects are not going to happen. They're going to. But
And this
we
is
have to
the
counter
second
that.
chance for virtual reality. We have to get it right this time.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, and it's this moment of setting that context that all creators that are involved with this need to really be focused on as a platonic responsibility, because it is the opposite stuff that's going on, because I've been consulting with some of the people at DARPA, and there's a light DARPA and there's a dark DARPA. There's very interesting things going on that are on both sides of that equation. So there are virtual reality torture environments that are already designed and have been created that are more effective than any physical torture that they've ever created. So it's these things need to be brought out in a way that sets that context and gets that dialogue going, because it can just slip in very easily. You know, the solipsistic aspect of people going into a virtual world and being disconnected. One of the things that we're very focused on at my company, Studio Lightship, is the idea of group virtual experience, GVX, you know, because the group activation is something that I think needs to be at the forefront of this as opposed to solo activation, because then you get a different kind of you know, mechanism that starts to happen. And I can't say more that this is an amazingly important moment right now.
I would just like to comment, I think when we are talking about the psychedelic experience, what we mean is the subjective psychedelic experience. It's hard to talk about the psychedelic experience as a generalized thing, because every experience is different. Everybody has different pasts, different futures, so forth and so on. So I'm just going to comment on what you said with the tool making aspect of it. These tools, the primitive versions, are being built today. And I think the answer to your question, like how will this manifest in the next coming years, I think it's all about bandwidth. The more bandwidth we have, the more information we can get across. And it will be high bandwidth. I predict that by like 2040, we'll have petabyte type speeds, like where we'll be able to actually have highly dense VR psychedelic environments, where instead of saying, oh, just download the latest MDMA trip, you could go download my latest MDMA trip and think about how intimate that would be to bring you into my world and show you my values and so forth. So I think the future is subjective, and I think we're going to have an exponential amount of choices in front of us. We'll be able to upload and download each other's memories, trips, hallucinations, dreams, and nightmares. And I think the answer to that is bandwidth.
And I think also what we're gonna find when we do start recreating these trips and showing each other these trips, it actually speaks to some stuff that Tina was talking about, is that we're gonna find that there is a lot of similarities, and that a lot of these subjective experiences come from some sort of unconscious archetype, but beyond that, there's a wholly other that we all tap into, and that we're all gonna sort of see that same thing. We're gonna see many similarities and mathematical similarities. I mean, everything is language, including mathematics. And that's going to come out, I'm sure.
We all are one. Yeah. 100%.
The simulation's getting smaller. We're all using.
One thing I wanted to talk about a little bit about is like these companies like NVIDIA, who've really caught on that you have to be watched and looked at how, because you're talking about bandwidth. Like a company like NVIDIA figured out they've got this chip with GPU on it, right? And they figured out, wow, we're doing something wonderful. We've got this distributed rendering possibility. And they were smart enough to realize, wow, this is exactly what AI needs. And then NVIDIA went, and they also started to develop the software for it. So a company like NVIDIA, without really thinking about the repercussions of what they're doing or anything like that, has got the software and the hardware working together, just like our human brains work, software and hardware. So it's going to be interesting what this all leads to, but you're absolutely right. It is bandwidth. It is the amount of information that can be, brought in at one time. The other thing about it I wanted to say is I'm not at all a religious person, but you can think about something like it from this point of view. If we are a creation, then we're a robot, basically, or we're a machine. Yeah. And so everything is a machine. And I say to people, say you're floating out there in space and some creature or something comes towards you. How do you know what it is? How do you know it's not a robot? How do you know it's also not a machine? And this goes back to that basic, where does the intelligence in the universe start? At what particle level? Where does it start? Where are these decisions being made? And why are forces attracted to each other? So.
I think kind kind of going back to simulation theory and what Jeffrey said earlier about how we're all kind of nodes of a single computer, is like, if philosophically, like when I really think about what is reality, on a philosophical level, what we call reality or normal reality or this reality, what defines it is just that you have the largest number of people who agree with it. So, and I think when it comes to electronic virtual reality, and not as it exists now, but possibly in its more advanced forms, where, and I think what Brett said here about multiple people rather than just one person experiencing the same electronic virtual reality, like what would happen if you get 7 billion or however many people plugged into a so-called fake reality? I think that's another thing. We have this idea of a hierarchy of realities, that this is the most real one and anything that we create is fake. And I don't think it necessarily has to be that way. I think it's more of a how many people are agreeing with it, because we're seeing similar enough things. And, you know, what would happen if we create a reality with EVR and the bandwidth issue kind of becomes solved, or that hurdle becomes overcome? And what if more people plug into a fake reality than this real one? Will that mean that that reality is more real?
I think that one of the things we should talk about a little bit is this whole question of AI, because AI is going to be very critical in the enabling of this medium. And there's a tremendous thing we have to overcome in the context of AI, because there's a very negative sort of context to AI that's been given by storytellers that have ever talked about it, including, recently.
It's demonized, yeah.
It's demonized, and if you go out in the street and say AI, most people will say Skynet, right?
It's because it takes the control away from man.
Exactly. And so the bottom line is, I think that we need to create the context of AI being, first of all, artificial intelligence is sort of, I think, a misnomer as a term. It's
electronic intelligence.
It's extended intelligence. It's EI, and the fact is, I believe EI can become reflective of the better angels of our nature, as opposed to the more primal reptilian brainstem aspects of our nature. And so that is up to us. It is not coming from somewhere else. It's coming from us. And setting that context, again, giving a context, storytelling context to that, I think is very critical to shift that perception to something that, because we will create, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we all believe, because of the consensus reality you're talking about, that's what's going to happen. The only reason we're sitting on this wooden stage and we're not falling through into the particles is because we have a consensus reality that we believe it's there. And if you talk to particle physicists, they'll tell you there's nothing there.
Yeah, quantum physics. If you took the
Why the hell is it
analysis of
solid?
this stage, it would tell you that it's not inherently real. That's what quantum physics would tell you.
Yeah.
If you analyzed this room and this stage deep enough, the physicists, the
Yes.
priests in the white lab coats that we look to for the answers would look down at us from their tower of physics and say, "It's not real, folks."
Exactly. One of my favorite, pastimes is to go get stoned with particle physicists from the Stanford Linear Accelerator, and it very quickly becomes this discussion. I'm like, so you're saying there's nothing there? I mean, it's like, what do you mean?
By the way, they
There's
love
only-
psychedelics.
I know,
Usually.
they do.
Well, what's happening is all of these communities are fusing together, and this is what the singularity is. We're binding closer and closer together. All boundaries are dissolving between every community, and that's why things are inherently seeming to get stranger and stranger. I mean, Donald Trump is the president, folks. Like, there is something weird going on.
Yes, and another critical thing is that this cannot be an elite. We can't create this as an elitist reality. That's there's much about virtual reality that's connected to economic determinism, and we need to stretch this out so that it includes everyone. Because without that, it's another form of fascism.
I think this all ties into also how we are.
Use the mic.
Oh yeah, sorry. That
it seems that virtual reality is going to show us that mind is primary, in my opinion. And it's once we start looking deeper into it, it's gonna be pretty apparent to us that mind is primary. And I think to kind of further the discussion of where is this taking us, what is reality, and where are we going with all this, I think that I always try to think of what will happen when we do find out mind is primary, and what will that mean for us? Will we be able to, Terrence had this idea of transcending life and death through shamanism, and he would talk about this a lot, and I just, that idea to me is I think these technologies are going to bring us to that point. They're going to bring us to this understanding that's going to further another understanding. And yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Q&A?
Yeah,
Can I say one thing fast?
Yeah.
And this is a thought that's been occurring to me for a long time, that science itself is actually the study of how the human brain works. Because all science gets you is an understanding of how we're perceiving things.
That's so true.
Great. And I'm going to ask one last question, and then we'll open it up for people. So I see that the potential for virtual reality is to transform consciousness. And so I imagine in my dream in 2025, 2045, you'll be able to go into a VR experience and then somehow either through descending AI, big data, collecting all this information about trying to define who we are, or through some sort of descending symbolic order for some of these esoteric traditions or other ways of trying to figure out who we are and why we're here, that there's going to be some way of combination of that descending and ascending symbolic logic that we're going to be able to identify the fundamental nature of somebody and then be able to give them a transformative experience on demand. And that we're going to be able to use this technology for each of us to get closer to who we are, why we're here, and to be more connected to ourselves, to each other, and to the planet. And so I want to just sort of go through the line here of what each of you see as sort of the most exalted potential of the combination of VR, psychedelics as a transformative technology.
The exalted potential. So this is one of those situations where spoken word language has limitations. I think really, I think the ultimate potential is that we're all going to understand each other completely. And we won't even need to explain ourselves. We will all become our own meaning. And yeah, it's hard to explain any further than that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can look to festivals like Burning Man or Om Festival, these transformational places where you can see the glimmering light of a new world. There is a new world out there, and it's not mediated by capitalism or 500 years of materialistic science.
So
it's only in the last 500 years that materialism has really become a huge problem for us. People have been talking to the other for far longer than they haven't been.
Yes, I'm working with a top researcher in quantum entanglement. And when you start looking at what is being empirically proved around quantum entanglement and connected to these things, there's going to be, I think, an acceleration effect that is beyond what we can actually fully see. There's a horizon factor to this. And when you start to get that group, there's been many ways it's been talked about in the past, like the 100th monkey effect, all these things. But the truth is, it's coming at us right now. This is the moment of bringing this, convergence together of all of these aspects. And I think that, to your question, this is about us realizing what it actually is to be, period. Yeah. Because
a global
that's
organism,
the
a human.
and it is a group experience that is also the experience of the one. Of course, there have been many ancient traditions that have done this in many different modalities. My journey on this started because I was hitchhiking across the Southwest and got grabbed by the Pima Maricosa Indian tribe at a truck stop. Literally. And they came up and said, "You have bear medicine." I had no idea what the hell they were talking about. I'm from Toledo, Ohio, right? And come and do this ritual with us. And so I went into a peyote ritual with them for the next 2 days that literally changed who I am. It literally recreated another version of myself that's now the version that's here on the stage. And it was a complete experience of quantum entanglement. We all, in this ritual, had the same exact experience. And that was such a mind-blowing thing. It changed everything I was and what I was doing in life. And that, I think, is what we can bring to people without having to necessarily have them take the actual, natural devic energies that allow that to open up. Those devic energies can be expressed through this technology in a way that I think is beyond what we right now consider to be possible.
Cool. So Terence McKenna would use different metaphors for things, and he has this metaphor that he uses for a thing called slime mold. And basically, slime mold is this organism that is spread over a few feet squared of forest floor. They're all over the place, and one single amoeba of this slime mold will send a signal out at some point. It's not fully understood exactly how this works, but they send a signal out that basically says, "Come to me." And when they do, they like all the amoebas from all over the forest floor will aggregate into one spot and literally lift the first ones there into the air. And what I think we're doing right now with consciousness and VR is that if we are able to wake up, as in for us psychonauts, people who are into this, I think it's 100% that we need to stress that it's not for everybody. This is not for everybody, in my opinion. I know you're a little bit different, but I don't think it's for everybody. But I think that's not a bad thing. I think that through people like us going into these spaces and maybe being able to recreate that in a VR world, that we're going to literally lift people into the air from our essence in the same way that this does. And I think that's the farthest extent I could see this. By the time I die, I hope I see that as something where people don't have to go through it's painful being a psychonaut sometimes. I'm sure we can all agree that you go into places that are very hard, and I mean, you're basically, you're on the fringe of insanity sometimes, and it's really hard to come back.
When you come down, you're so happy to be alive.
Yes,
you have a newfound appreciation of what just happened to you.
But I don't think that everybody needs to go into that state. I think that people like us, and the more people that get into this, our state will affect your state. Our state will affect everybody else. And through VR, that's kind of like a gateway into the minds of these psychonauts. And that's what I would hope to see.
I had many conversations with Terence, who was a good friend of mine.
No.
In the hot tub at Esalen,
Nice.
where we often congregated, about exactly this. And he was so, and as he would say, the velvet doorway would open, and the elfin beings brought me this idea, and so it literally he's a front wave of what this exact transformational message is about.
And I think it's good to state a lot of the thoughts that all of us are saying here. If you're interested in this stuff, start looking at Terence McKenna lectures, because what you're saying.
These are not new ideas.
No, these
like,
especially what you're saying. It's like literally Terence's words just reiterated, and he is the driving force behind this ideology, if you want to call it that.
And before him, the Pathfinder was Timothy Leary.
100%.
Exactly, who was also a good friend of mine. Because after I made the Lawnmower Man, all these guys literally sought me out. And for me, as a kid from Toledo, Ohio, that was really crazy exotic. Believe me, it was like suddenly Timothy Leary was, at my birthday party, speed rapping in my ear for like an hour about all this stuff, trying to download as much as he could, and then he had his death party. He had a death party for a month that was webcast, and many of us were there. It was, these are the founding fathers of our psychedelic nation, and really there's a tremendous body of work there to start from as a foundation for all of this.
I'll try and keep it brief. First of all, my opinion is psychedelics are like sex. It's unfortunate if you go out your entire life without having it. And as long as you're not a dissociative personality type or schizotypal or schizophrenic, I encourage you to, when you walk out this door, to start dialing numbers and looking for tabs, man. But this guy's a researcher, so he's going to say, be careful, don't listen to that young man.
I say that also that if you guys are interested in this stuff, I'm a leader at the Toronto Psychedelic Society. You can find us on Facebook, and there's always somebody who has what you need in the... Oh, yes, we're on meetup.com. You can check us out there. We have meetups. I'm planning a picnic, a psychedelic picnic for July, so you guys could all come out. Yeah.
But where is this all leading to? What was the point of all this? For me, my opinion is that what you're really looking at is the next episode, folks. Like, the monkey's over. Like, the last like, I don't know, like really the thing is this, I think my big hope for VR is that it's basically going to melt down materialistic, patriarchal, dominator culture, and it's actually going to like queerify everyone. Everyone's going to get way more soft, way more loving, because when you talk about like you could do a torture VR, like no, torture VR is not going to fly. And people can only do so much shooting in the first person thing. Eventually the art's going to take over, the emotion's going to take over, and the human being as we know it and as we've known it since, I don't know, the Western male mind took over the world, that's going to get smoothed out. And we're going to be using VR to communicate more and more ideas, expressions of art, feelings, wants, needs, desires, fears, and hopes. And the monkey's over. It's just over. And then the AI is going to show up like, this is it. This is the last gasp. And it's either that the planet's going to go kaput or everyone's going to get like soft.
The planet's going to be fine.
The planet will be fine. The planet will be
It's us that
fine.
may not be here.
Yeah, but no, I think VR is going to be used because, like I'm saying, culture is already a virtual reality. So, program. So once we're playing more and more virtual realities, this is what my whole book is about, is that like once we play more and more in virtual realities, we're going to realize this is a virtual reality. It doesn't need to be this way. It's arbitrary. We made it up. A law is a code, is a joke. That's it. We can drop them if we want. But all our institutions are fake.
Oh.
I like that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
This is I think the other thing we've all been talking about is this realization that we're all one, that we're all individual repeating units that all are joined into being one. And within that framework, you wonder, okay, what is the value of me as a repeating unit? My individuality. How does that fit in to this all being one? And I hear about things like chips being put into my head so that I'm going to automatically connect with everything else that's going on and have all the thoughts of the universe there, etc. And then I wonder, how am I going to know who I am at that point? Or does it matter if I know who I am when I've got all these thoughts from the whole world coming into my head at one time? Will that negate any value as a repeating individual unit that I might be contributing to this whole? Why are we set up as repeating individual units? Why do we have this individuality? I'm going to say something a little even wackier. I once had a vision where I was a little light, and I was surrounded by other lights, and I was feeling incredibly loved being this little light. And then in the midst of that, it occurred to me that I could be a little light with my own, giving out my light, and yet I was also contributing to all of the light together. So.
The truth is in the paradox.
So I'm going to open it up to questions and come around, and I'm going to ask the panelists to maybe answer popcorn style, so whoever feels like they have the most sort of pregnant response, so that we can get through a number of different questions. So I'll go back here and then run around.
Thanks so much. So the biggest sort of massive red light bulb that keeps going up over my head. You can't see me, but I'm brown. I'm Filipino. And there's a lot of people who are starving in the world. And there's a lot of people who are... There's a lot of people who are, not part of this one vision that you guys have, simply because the material world is very real to them. Whether that's because they can feel their hunger, or whether that's because they can feel the pain when they're actually physically assaulted, and that's because they can feel the pain in their feet because they don't have shoes and they have to find a home, and they're cold and they're dehydrated. How do you guys respond to that?
Can I say something? Well, in North America, we live in a well-defended pleasure dome. And I think it's up to us, the people of the material top 10% of the entire planet, it's up to us to utilize the best technologies we can so we can reach out and help these people. The mushroom said to me once, the planet will be fine, it's you that has to adapt. I've been here for 18 million years. And, culture it's severely severed our connection to this planet.
And to others.
And maybe these people that you're talking about in the Philippines that are closer to nature, they face different struggles than we face. And it's unfortunate that that has to happen. But it's up to us, the people in this part of the world, to reach out and use all of these technologies in the best way we can so we can empathically understand each other, so we don't do the things that we are doing to each other. Terence McKenna once said, if we could feel what we are doing, we would stop doing it. Right. But we can't. We live in abstraction, isolation, and reinforced culturally linguistic values that are taking your attention and putting them towards Hollywood or the superstore.
So can I make one more comment? Okay. So I think one of the things that could be a response to my question is, and you sort of alluded to it, which is, and I'll explain it by virtue of talking about a virtual experience we just recently created. So we produced a piece called Small Wonders, and it's essentially a VR experience that took 15th century Gothic objects made out of boxwood that fit into the palm of your hand. Inside these Gothic boxwood beads, when you open them, are Christian dioramas, okay, that are the size of pinheads. And artists and conservators for years didn't know how this master person made these boxwood pieces. And it wasn't until you could micro-CT scan them and then create life-size overscaled VR experiences could people go inside these beads and see these pinhead figures of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary and Purgatory emerge. And what happened was a meditative experience for audiences when we showed it at the Met Cloisters and stuff, and people were having transcendental experiences with this because they couldn't believe that someone was blessed by the divine hand somehow to have made such intricate, tiny, impactful stories, okay, in this bead. And so my question for you is there a role for the material world to show itself up in VR that's so that you don't just privilege the sort of conceptual trips that you have, but can somehow also show in VR the intricacy and the kind of transcendental nature of the material world itself?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I would say yes. There's two quick comments I want to say. Media will never be food. That's for sure. Right. So we were talking about starving people. Media is not food. That's the end of that. A friend of mine who I met at the local bar one day, turned out we were going to be best friends. She did a VR a couple of years ago. You may have heard of it, where it's a bunch of people on a life raft who are refugees trying to get into another country. They can see the shoreline coming. A boat comes up to meet them, and they're like, yay, yay, Coast Guard, help us. Coast Guard gets up to the raft, takes out a big knife and starts stabbing the raft, and they all start drowning in it, right? It was a very freaky VR. People walked away with a totally different attitude about the immigrant crisis right there. So no, it's not food, but in terms of getting people to think and experience what these kind of hardships might be, I would say there's value there, yeah. And is there a role for the material world? I mean, I'm not losing a body anytime soon. This thing's sticking around.
But you're right. We have to design a connection to the physical world within the context of virtual experience. And that's when I was talking about GVX, group virtual experience. It really is a physical experience connected to a transcendental experience. And without that, I think VR is extremely dangerous. Matter of fact, that's what I made movies about. The danger. I mean, the irony of my life is I literally told cautionary tales about virtual reality, helped, sort of get it, a glamorous aspect around it for some people. But that's not what I would, beware of telling cautionary tales. That's what I'm saying, because you sort of, popularize the very thing that you're warning about. But that, I could not agree with you more, that has to be at the core conception and design right from the beginning, what you're talking about.
Yeah, that was great. And I think we have time for maybe one last quick question, and then we have to end. Is anybody really... Okay, we have one back here. I saw a hand, and then we'll wrap up.
We'll reconvene at the book signing in the Ven room. We'll take it downstairs. Meet us there.
Yeah, if you see any of us, I'm sure none of us would object to you guys coming to talk to us, get our contact info. Yeah.
We're here to meet you.
Yeah.
Just make sure you have a tab.
I'm just wondering about the, how do I say it? About maintaining the importance of the human connection in, you were talking about shamanic experiences, and I believe that interpersonal connection is kind of fundamental to that. So how do you imagine or envision maintaining that in a virtual experience?
So I don't think that, I think to what, something that you had said as well, is that I don't think that that is 100, like, I think that our human ideal is a little bit bigger than, like, we look at ourselves as much more important than our identity as much more important than it is. And I think we're going to realize that through these group experiences, and that we are one, we are a whole one, and that it's going to demystify this human experience to the point that we're going to somehow transcend into a higher form of understanding. And I think that you're right, that there is a need for human connection, but I think when we truly connect, that's going to go out the window. I think when we're truly that one.
Well, the joy and ecstasy that happens when you actually have that connection through whatever modality is so potent, it changes you forever, and you evolve. And so that evolvement of the group mind, of the group experience, really is at the core of this. If it's not, it's the opposite. And so that's why I think this is a pivot point we're in right now, and we need to talk more about the potential negative aspects of this and make sure that we're designing into this from the beginning something that is inherently connective.
Yeah, and it's also good to remember that everything that we're going through is a process. I mean, the obvious no way backness of our situation reveals that this is some sort of process moving towards some sort of concrescence. And that's also, I was going to say too, that's a term that was coined by Alfred North Whitehead, and magical, that if you have the time to read Process in Reality, it's a magical book. But I think that we need to remember is that everything that we're doing, including going into the bad realms and the good ones, that there needs to be this duality for us to move forward, and we need to all work together. We need to know the extent of our disgusting humanness, as well as our loving compassion and all.
That's the shamanistic process. I mean, you have to go, you're taken by the shaman into the darkness to move through it into the light. I mean, that is at the core of shamanistic process throughout all cultures. And if, one of the things I'm looking at is I've been using tribal ritual structure in the context of designing virtual world design. And the anthropologic, scholarship on this is immense. And it's an incredible corpus of knowledge to use instead of 3-act structure of drama and things that people are tending to go to, which is really not endemic or organic to this medium. The ritual structure actually is, because it is about leaving reality, going into a liminal state, and then integrating what happens in that liminal state back into reality. And it's a huge rabbit hole to go down, but it's really informing everything I'm doing.
This is a little strange. It's just a thought that's occurring to me, is that this can easily be used to exploit people. That down through the ages, people have started cults, religions, where they say we're all one, we all act as one, and then people are exploited.
Every single time.
Every single religion is a great exploiter of
yes.
people.
Well,
we're getting played out. So.
And on that religious note.
So with that, I just want to thank everybody for joining here today and for exploring this. So thank you.